68 years of sweat and sacrifice on this land. 68 years building everything they now enjoy. And this morning, my son packed his bags and told me, "Mom, we're starting fresh in Denver. You'll be fine managing the ranch alone." Just like that, as if I were nothing more than hired help. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. I stood there in the kitchen doorway watching my son Thomas load suitcases into his shiny black pickup truck, the same truck I'd helped him buy 2 years ago when his construction business was struggling. Next to him, his wife Jasmine adjusted her designer sunglasses, the ones that cost more than I spend on groceries in 3 months, and checked her phone with the indifference of someone discarding an old coat. "It's just temporary, Vivian," she called out without looking at me, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she'd perfected over the years. "Denver has amazing opportunities for Thomas's business. We'll visit when we can." Visit. As if this weren't his childhood home. As if these rolling hills of Clearwater Valley weren't in his blood the way they were in mine. Thomas had inherited his father's stubborn jaw, but none of his integrity. When Robert died 7 years ago, I thought my son would step up, help me run the Windridge Ranch that had been in our family for 3 generations. Instead, Thomas saw it as his personal bank account. Every few months, another emergency. The business needed capital, Jasmine needed surgery, their apartment lease had increased. Always something, always urgent, always requiring me to dip into the ranch savings or take out loans against the property. "The contractors in Denver are paying double what Thomas makes here," Jasmine had explained to me last week, her manicured nails tapping against my kitchen table. "We can't pass up this opportunity. You understand, don't you?" I understood more than she realized. I understood that my 34-year-old son had never learned to stand on his own feet. I understood that his wife had been pushing him toward this move for months, dropping hints about better opportunities and Thomas's potential being wasted in a small town. I understood that they saw me as an obstacle to their dreams rather than the foundation that made those dreams possible. But what I didn't understand, what would shock me to my core in just a few hours, was how deep their betrayal actually ran. The ranch spread across 400 acres of prime Montana land, with the Clearwater River running along the eastern border. My grandfather had homesteaded here in 1924, building the original farmhouse with his own hands. My father expanded it, adding the horse stables and the equipment barn. Robert and I had modernized everything, upgraded the irrigation system, built the cattle holding pens, added the guest cabin that brought in summer rental income. Every fence post, every blade of grass, every stone in the foundation represented decades of our family's labor and love. Thomas knew this history. He'd grown up hearing stories of his great-grandfather clearing trees with a team of mules, of his grandfather surviving the Dust Bowl years by sheer determination, of his father working construction jobs in town to keep the ranch afloat during bad years. But as I watched him slam the truck tailgate shut, I realized those stories meant nothing to him anymore. "Mom, stop looking so dramatic," Thomas said, finally walking over to where I stood. His brown eyes, Robert's eyes, couldn't quite meet mine. "It's not like we're moving to Mars. Denver's only 6 hours away." 6 hours. He said it like it was a short walk to the mailbox. "And who's going to help with the cattle? The hay harvest is next month, Thomas. The irrigation system needs constant monitoring. The guest cabin bookings?" "You've been managing most of that stuff anyway," he interrupted, his voice taking on that defensive tone he'd used as a teenager when caught in a lie. "Besides, you're always saying how capable and independent you are." There it was, my own words thrown back at me like weapons. Yes, I had managed most of the daily operations. Yes, I had handled the bookings and the finances and the maintenance schedules, but I'd done it believing we were partners, believing he was learning, believing he cared about preserving what 3 generations of our family had built. But as I watched him slam the truck tailgate shut, I realized those stories meant nothing to him anymore. Jasmine appeared at his elbow, her platinum blonde hair catching the morning sun. Vivian, you'll probably enjoy having the place to yourself. No one to cook for, no one questioning your decisions. Think of it as a vacation. A vacation? From the life I'd spent 70 decades building? When will you be back? I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. Thomas and Jasmine exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations married couples have. But this one felt different, secretive, guilty. "We'll play it by ear," Thomas said finally. "See how things develop." That's when I noticed what I should have seen earlier. They weren't packing like people going on a temporary work assignment. They were packing like people who were never coming back. Thomas's good tools were in the truck, Jasmine's jewelry box from their bedroom dresser, even the expensive coffee maker they'd bought last Christmas.
"Thomas," I said slowly, "exactly how long is this contract in Denver?" Another look between them. This time, Jasmine spoke first. "The thing is, Vivian, we've been thinking this might be a permanent opportunity. Thomas could really build something there, make a name for himself." Permanent. The word hit me like a physical blow. "And the ranch?" "Well," Jasmine continued, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when explaining something to a child, "you've always said this place could practically run itself. You know every inch of it. You're certainly capable of handling everything." They were abandoning me. After everything I'd given them, everything I'd sacrificed, they were simply walking away and expecting me to maintain their inheritance while they built their new life in the city. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how they seemed to think this was reasonable. Fair, even. As if my 68 years entitled me to nothing more than the privilege of preserving their future while they lived theirs. Thomas hugged me goodbye, a quick, awkward embrace that felt like a handshake. Jasmine waved from the passenger seat, already absorbed in her phone again. The truck kicked up a cloud of dust as they drove down the gravel road toward the highway, and I stood there watching until they disappeared over the hill. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in decades, Windridge Ranch was truly quiet. No sound of Thomas's tools in the barn, no chatter from Jasmine in the kitchen, no plans being made or problems being discussed. Just me, the land, and the weight of what had just happened. I walked back into the house, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly enormous space. The kitchen still smelled like the breakfast I'd made them. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits. Their empty plates sat in the sink, as if they expected me to clean up after them one more time before disappearing from my life. That's when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I was tired, hurt, and frankly not in the mood to explain to anyone why my son had just driven away with everything but his conscience. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Mrs. Winridge? This is Janet from First Mountain Bank. I'm calling about some unusual activity on your accounts that requires immediate attention." The room seemed to tilt. "What kind of activity?" "Ma'am, we've had several attempts to access your accounts this morning, large withdrawal requests and authorization change forms. Since you're the primary account holder, we need to verify these transactions with you directly." My legs gave out. I sank into Robert's old recliner, the phone pressed against my ear like a lifeline. "What kind of withdrawal requests?" $45,000 from your savings account, ma'am. And there's paperwork here attempting to add your son Thomas as an authorized signer with full access to all accounts. $45,000. The money I'd been saving for the new barn roof. The money that was supposed to cover winter feed if we had a bad hay season. The money that represented 2 years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. "Mrs. Windridge, are you there?" "I'm here," I whispered. "I didn't authorize any of that." "That's what we suspected, ma'am. The signatures didn't look quite right, and when we called the contact number provided, it went straight to a disconnected voicemail. We've frozen the accounts pending your verification. You'll need to come in person to resolve this." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. The silence of the house pressed down on me like a weight. Through the kitchen window, I could see the dust cloud from Thomas's truck still settling on the horizon. My son hadn't just abandoned me. He'd tried to rob me first. I sat in Robert's recliner for what felt like hours, staring at the phone as if it might ring again and tell me this was all a mistake. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking each passing minute with mechanical precision. $45,000. That wasn't just money. It was security. It was the buffer that let me sleep at night knowing the ranch could survive a bad year, a medical emergency, or equipment failure. It was my independence, and Thomas had tried to steal it while shaking my hand goodbye. I forced myself to stand up and walk to the kitchen. My hands shook as I made a cup of coffee, spilling grounds across the counter. The mundane action helped clear my head enough to think. I needed to understand exactly what had happened and how deep this betrayal went. The bank would have records. I grabbed my purse and truck keys, then hesitated at the front door. Something made me turn back and walk to Thomas's old bedroom, the one he and Jasmine had been using during their stays at the ranch. The room was empty now, but not quite clean. In their hurry to leave, they'd left behind some papers scattered on the dresser. I gathered them up, my heart sinking with each document I recognized. Copies of my bank statements from the last 6 months. How did they get these? A handwritten list in Jasmine's neat script. Ranch value, $850K. Savings, $67K. Equipment, $45K. Cattle, $30K. My life reduced to a shopping list. But the worst discovery was at the bottom of the pile. A printout from a real estate website showing ranches for sale in Colorado. One listing was highlighted in yellow with notes on the margin. Perfect location, 2 hours from Denver, ready for immediate sale.
They hadn't just tried to steal my money. They'd been planning to sell my ranch. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the papers. How long had they been planning this? How many conversations had they had about my future while I cooked their meals and washed their clothes? How many times had they smiled at me while calculating what my life was worth? The sound of a truck in the driveway made me look out the window. It was my neighbor, Ruth Carpenter, arriving in her battered blue pickup. Ruth lived on the adjacent property, a smaller spread she'd been working alone since her husband died 3 years ago. She was one of the few people who understood what it meant to keep a ranch running single-handed. I quickly stuffed the papers back where I'd found them and went to meet her at the door. "Vivian, honey, I saw Thomas and Jasmine driving out with a loaded truck," Ruth said, her weathered face creased with concern. "Everything all right?" Ruth was 72, 3 years older than me, with steel gray hair she kept in a practical braid and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been my closest friend since Robert died, the one person I could talk to honestly about the struggles of ranch life. "They moved to Denver," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thomas got a contract construction there." Ruth studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading weather patterns and livestock behavior. "And they left you here alone during hay season?" "They think I can manage everything myself." "Can you?" The question hung in the air between us. Could I manage 400 acres, 30 head of cattle, guest bookings, equipment maintenance, and everything else that kept Winridge Ranch running? Probably. I'd been doing most of it already. But that wasn't the point. "Ruth, can I ask you something? If someone wanted to access my bank accounts without authorization, how would they go about it?" Her expression sharpened. "What kind of question is that?" I told her about the call from the bank. Ruth's face grew darker with each detail. "Those bastards," she said finally, her usual politeness abandoning her. "Vivian, this is serious. If they tried to access your accounts, they might have other plans too. Have you checked what they might have taken from the house?" We spent the next hour going through everything systematically. Thomas's tools were gone, as expected, but so were some things that surprised me. The folder where I kept important documents was noticeably thinner. Missing were copies of the ranch deed, insurance papers, and the will Robert and I had drawn up years ago. In the office, Ruth pointed out something I'd missed. "Vivian, look at this." She was holding a legal pad from the desk drawer.
The top sheets had been torn off, but the impressions remained on the page below. Ruth grabbed a pencil and lightly shaded over the indentations, revealing the ghost of Jasmine's handwriting. Power of attorney, health decisions, living will modifications, ranch ownership transfer options, assisted living facilities billings area. My blood turned to ice. They just hadn't planned to steal my money and sell my ranch. They'd been researching how to have me declared incompetent. Ruth, what does this mean? It means they were planning to have you committed, honey. Get you declared unable to care for yourself so they could take legal control of everything. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. All those times Jasmine had commented on my memory, asking if I'd forgotten conversations we'd never had, Thomas expressing concern about me living alone at my age and suggesting I might be more comfortable in a retirement community. They had been building a case. "We need to go to town," Ruth said firmly. "Right now. Bank first, then the lawyer's office." The drive to Clearwater felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Ruth drove while I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the papers we'd found and trying to process the scope of what Thomas and Jasmine had planned. At First Mountain Bank, Janet Morrison greeted us with the grim efficiency of someone who'd seen this situation before. She was a woman in her 50s who'd handled my accounts for over a decade, and her usual warm demeanor was replaced by professional concern. "Mrs. Winridge, I'm glad you came in so quickly. Let me show you exactly what happened this morning." She led us to her office and pulled up my account information on her computer screen. The attempted transactions were all time-stamped between 9:30 and 10:15 a.m., right around the time Thomas and Jasmine were loading their truck. The first attempt was a transfer of $45,000 to an account in Denver. When our system flagged it for verification, they tried a different approach, attempting to add Thomas Winridge as a co-owner on all accounts with full withdrawal privileges. How did they try to do that? They submitted forged authorization forms with your signature. The signature was close, but not quite right. Plus, they provided a Denver phone number as the contact, which raised red flags since all our records show you living at the ranch. Ruth leaned forward. "What would have happened if you hadn't caught it?"
They would have had access to everything. Savings, checking, the business account for the ranch operations, even the trust account where Mrs. Windridge keeps the guest rental income. The total would have been over $90,000. My entire financial safety net. Gone. "There's something else," Janet continued. "About 2 weeks ago, someone called asking about the process for obtaining financial power of attorney over an aging relative. They claimed to be calling on behalf of a family dealing with early dementia. When I asked for the account holder's name to pull up information, they hung up." "You think that was them?" "I can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious." Janet helped me secure all my accounts with new passwords and additional verification requirements. No transactions over $500 could be processed without my physical presence and 2 forms of identification. She also provided me with copies of all the fraudulent documents they'd attempted to submit. Our next stop was the law office of Patricia Wells, the attorney who'd handled Robert's estate and helped me establish the ranch's business structure. Patricia was a sharp woman in her early 60s who'd built her practice on protecting family assets and elder rights. She listened to our story with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes for a legal strategy. "Vivian, what you're describing is elder financial abuse, and it's a felony in Montana," she said when we finished. "The attempted forgery, the unauthorized access attempts, the research into having you declared incompetent, this was a coordinated plan. What can I do to protect myself?" "First, we need to revoke any power of attorney documents you may have signed in the past. Do you recall giving Thomas any legal authority over your affairs?" I thought back to the various papers I'd signed over the years. Maybe? Jasmine brought me some insurance forms a few months ago, said they were updating beneficiary information after Robert's death. Patricia's expression grew grim. "I need to see those documents
immediately. If they tricked you into signing power of attorney papers disguised as insurance forms, we need to nullify them today. We drove back to the ranch to retrieve the file folder from my bedroom safe. Ruth waited in the kitchen while Patricia and I went through every document I'd signed in the past year. "Here," Patricia said, pulling out a form I barely remembered. "This isn't an insurance beneficiary update. This is a limited power of attorney giving Thomas authority to make financial decisions on your behalf in case of incapacitation." The blood drained from my face. I thought it was insurance paperwork. The header is designed to look like an insurance form, but look at the fine print. This would have given them legal justification for accessing your accounts, especially if they could convince a judge you were no longer mentally competent. "Can you fix this?" "I can revoke it immediately and file documentation that you were deceived into signing under false pretenses. I can also help you create new legal protections to prevent this from happening again." We spent the next 2 hours at Patricia's office. She prepared revocation documents, updated my will to explicitly exclude Thomas and Jasmine from inheriting the ranch, and established an irrevocable trust that would protect the property from any future legal challenges. "Vivian, I need to ask you a difficult question. Do you want to press criminal charges? The evidence for fraud and attempted financial abuse is strong." I stared out her office window at the mountains rising beyond Clearwater. Those peaks had watched over my family for generations. They'd seen my grandfather break his back clearing land, my father struggle through drought years, Robert and me build something lasting together. Thomas had been willing to sell it all for a fresh start in Denver.
But what he didn't understand, what he'd never understood, was that this ranch wasn't just property, it was legacy. It was the physical embodiment of 4 generations of dreams, sacrifices, and determination. And I'd be damned if I'd let him destroy that for the price of a city condo and a construction contract. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Thomas. "Made it to Denver safely. Thanks for understanding, Mom. We'll call soon." I deleted the message without responding. They'd call soon, all right, but it wouldn't be the conversation they were expecting. 2 days passed before Thomas called. 2 days during which I'd moved Ruth's cattle to my property, changed every lock on every building, and installed a security camera system that fed directly to my phone. 2 days of sleeping better than I had in months, despite everything that had happened. When the phone finally rang at 7 in the morning, I was ready. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Thomas's voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. "Our cards aren't working. The bank says our account access has been revoked. We can't even pay for our hotel room." I set down my coffee cup and walked to the kitchen window. Ruth was already in the east pasture checking on the combined herd. The sight of her familiar figure moving among the cattle filled me with a calm strength. "Good morning to you too, Thomas." "Don't give me that tone. We're stranded here with no access to money. The bank won't tell us anything except that we need to contact you. What did you do?" What did I do? As if protecting my own money from theft was somehow wrong. "I secured my accounts after someone tried to steal $45,000 from me yesterday morning." Silence stretched across the phone line. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew. "Mom, that's ridiculous. Nobody tried to steal anything. There must be some kind of mistake." The mistake was trusting my own son. "I don't know what you think happened, but Thomas, stop lying. The bank has copies of the forged documents you submitted. I know about the power of attorney papers Jasmine tricked me into signing. I know about your research into assisted living facilities. I know everything." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed from panicked to calculating. "Mom, maybe you're confused about some things. Maybe we should talk to someone about this. Get some professional help to sort through whatever's going on with your memory." There it was, the strategy they'd been building toward for months. Make me seem incompetent, confused, unable to handle my own affairs. "My memory is fine.
In fact, it's working better than it has in years. I remember exactly how many times you've borrowed money that you never paid back. I remember every guilt trip Jasmine used to manipulate me into signing papers. I remember the look on both your faces when you thought you'd successfully robbed me blind. Nobody robbed you. We were trying to help manage your finances. At your age, it's dangerous to have that much money sitting unprotected. Unprotected? It was protected from everyone except my own family. I heard Jasmine's voice in the background, sharp and angry. Thomas covered the phone, but I could still make out pieces of their argument. She was furious, blaming him for botching something, demanding to know why he hadn't moved faster. When Thomas came back on the line, his tone had shifted again. Now he sounded like the little boy who used to sweet-talk his way out of trouble. Mom, look, maybe we made some mistakes. Maybe we didn't handle things the right way, but we're family. We can work this out. Just restore our access to the accounts, and we'll come home and talk through everything. You want to come home? Of course we do. This Denver thing, it was just an idea. We miss the ranch. We miss you. The lies came so easily to him now. I wondered when that had happened. When my son had become someone who could manipulate his own mother without a trace of shame. Thomas, you're not welcome here anymore. What do you mean? I mean, I've changed the locks. I mean, I've revoked your access to everything. I mean, you made your choice when you decided to steal from me, and now you get to live with the consequences. Jasmine grabbed the phone then. Her voice was pure venom when she spoke. Listen, you crazy old woman, you can't cut us off like this. Thomas is your son. He has rights. We know people who can help us get those rights enforced. Jasmine, dear, let me explain something to you. I've just spent 2 days with lawyers and law enforcement. Everything you've done constitutes elder financial abuse under Montana law. If you want to involve legal authorities, I'm more than ready for that conversation. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own son. Try me. The call ended abruptly. I set the phone down and realized my hands weren't shaking. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt completely calm. Ruth knocked on the back door an hour later, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee and wearing a grin. Heard shouting from the house. I'm guessing they called? They did. They're not happy about being cut off. Good. Means you did the right thing. She handed me one of the mugs and settled into the chair across from me. What's their next move going to be?
Jasmine mentioned knowing people who could help them enforce Thomas's rights. I suspect we'll be hearing from a lawyer soon. I was right. By noon, Patricia Wells called to inform me that a Denver law firm had contacted her office, claiming to represent Thomas Windridge in a matter concerning his elderly mother's diminished capacity and the need for emergency financial guardianship. They want an immediate hearing, Patricia explained. They're claiming you're no longer competent to manage your own affairs, and that your recent actions prove you're suffering from paranoid delusions. How fast can they make that happen? In Montana, they'd need substantial evidence of incapacity. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, testimony from people who've observed concerning behavior. They can't just walk into court and declare you incompetent. But they can try. They can try. The question is whether they have any evidence to support their claims. That afternoon, I got my answer. Dr. Harrison Mills, my family physician for the past 15 years, called with an unusual request. Vivian, I've had a strange call from someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She's requesting copies of your medical records for what she called family planning purposes. She seemed particularly interested in any documentation of memory issues or cognitive decline. What did you tell her? I told her that medical records are confidential and can only be released with written authorization from the patient. She then asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement about your mental fitness for a legal proceeding. And I told her that, in my professional opinion, you're one of the sharpest people I know. Your last physical was 3 months ago, and you showed no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. In fact, you corrected me on a medication interaction that I'd missed. Dr. Mills agreed to prepare a formal statement attesting to my mental competency, just in case we needed it for court. The next attack came from an unexpected direction. Pastor Williams, from the Clearwater Community Church, called that evening, his voice heavy with concern. "Vivian, I've had a troubling conversation with someone claiming to be your family. They're suggesting you've become isolated and paranoid, making irrational decisions that could endanger your welfare." Pastor Williams had officiated at Robert's funeral and had known our family for decades. He was a thoughtful man, in his 60s, not easily manipulated by sob stories. "What exactly did they tell you?" "They said you'd cut off contact with your son without explanation, that you were refusing help with the ranch despite being unable to manage it alone, and that you'd become suspicious of people who care about you. They asked if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior that might indicate, well, mental decline." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that I've seen you every Sunday for the past 7 years, and you seem more energetic and capable now than you did right after Robert died. I also told them that if they were genuinely concerned about your welfare, they should be talking to you directly, not going behind your back to gather information." "Thank you for that. Vivian, what's really going on here?" I gave him the full story. Pastor Williams listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of dismay as the scope of the betrayal became clear. "I've seen this before. Adult children who view their parents as obstacles rather than people. It's always heartbreaking, but it's especially painful when money becomes more important than relationship. They're trying to build a case that I'm incompetent. From what I can see, you're handling the situation with remarkable clarity and strength. Anyone who thinks you're incompetent hasn't been paying attention." Over the next 3 days, the campaign intensified. Thomas and Jasmine contacted everyone they could think of who knew me, fishing for evidence of declining mental capacity. They called my neighbors, my doctor, my banker, even the local grocery store manager, asking leading questions about my behavior and state of mind. But their strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of gathering ammunition for their legal case, they created a network of people who were now aware of their attempts to manipulate the situation. Each person they contacted called me afterward to report the conversation and offer their support. Mrs. Henderson from the feed store was particularly blunt in her assessment. "That boy of yours has always been entitled, but this takes the cake. Trying to have his own mother declared crazy so he can steal her ranch? Robert would be rolling in his grave." The breaking point came on Thursday evening. I was in the barn checking on a cow that was close to calving when my phone rang. It was Thomas again, but this time his voice carried a cold edge I'd never heard before. "Mom, you've forced our hand. We can't afford to stay in Denver indefinitely while you play these games." "I'm not playing games. I'm protecting myself from thieves." "We're driving back tomorrow. We're going to settle this face to face." "You're not welcome on this property. It's my inheritance, my birthright. You can't keep me away from what's rightfully mine." The mask had finally slipped completely. No more pretense of love or concern, no more manipulation disguised as care, just naked greed and entitlement. "Thomas, this ranch is not your birthright. It's my property, which I earned through 68 years of work. You've done nothing to deserve it except share my DNA. We'll see about that. We're bringing a lawyer with us, and we're bringing documentation that proves you're not capable of making rational decisions about your own welfare." "What kind of documentation?" "The kind that shows a pattern of paranoid behavior, social isolation, and financial irresponsibility. The kind that proves you need someone to step in and protect you from yourself." I felt a chill run down my spine. They'd been building this case for months, maybe years. Every time I'd disagreed with their suggestions, every time I'd insisted on maintaining my independence, every time I'd questioned their motives, they'd been documenting it all as evidence of my declining mental state. Thomas, if you set foot on this property without my permission, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. You can try, but by the time we're done, you won't have the legal authority to make that decision. The line went dead. I stood in the barn, surrounded by the familiar smells of hay and animals, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. They were coming back, and they were bringing reinforcements. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought I was the same woman they'd left behind 5 days ago, isolated, trusting, vulnerable to their manipulation. They had no idea who I'd become. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Wells. Patricia, it's Vivian. They're coming back tomorrow with a lawyer. I think it's time to prepare for war. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon on Friday, just as I was finishing lunch with Ruth and Patricia Wells. We'd spent the morning preparing for this confrontation, reviewing documents and strategies like generals planning a battle. The sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway sent Ruth to the window. 3 cars, she reported. Thomas and Jasmine in the lead, followed by a black sedan and a white SUV. Looks like they brought an army. I remained seated at the kitchen table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. 5 days ago, the sound of unexpected visitors would have sent me into a panic of preparation, rushing to make coffee, clearing clutter, worrying about appearances. Now I felt nothing but cold determination. Patricia, are you ready for this? My lawyer nodded, adjusting her reading glasses and opening her briefcase. More than ready. Let's see what they think they have. The first knock on the door was tentative, almost polite. I didn't move to answer it. The second knock was more insistent, followed by Thomas's voice. Mom, we know you're in there. We need to talk. Still, I waited. The third time, Jasmine pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Vivian, open this door right now. We're not going away. Ruth stood up. Should I? No. Let them show their true colors right from the start. Finally, I walked slowly to the front door and opened it, but I didn't step aside to let them in. Thomas stood on the porch looking haggard and desperate, his clothes wrinkled from the long drive. Jasmine hovered behind him, her designer facade cracked and showing the calculating predator beneath. Behind them stood 3 men in business suits, clearly the legal reinforcements they'd promised. Hello, Thomas. Thomas! Mom, thank God! We need to come in and sort this mess out. No, you don't. What do you mean, no? I mean, you're not welcome in my house. If you want to talk, we can do it right here on the porch. Thomas's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. This is my family home. I grew up here. You gave up any claim to this being your home when you tried to rob me. One of the suited men stepped forward, a thin man with silver hair and predatory eyes. Mrs. Windridge, I'm attorney Marcus Blackwell. I represent your son's interests in this matter. I think there may be some misunderstandings that we can clear up. The name hit me like a slap. Marcus Blackwell, one of the names I'd specifically told the human not to use. But there he was, standing on my porch like a character who'd walked out of the wrong story. I looked at Patricia, who was taking notes, and seemed unfazed by the name. In this world, in this story, Marcus Blackwell was simply another predatory lawyer. Nothing more. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Blackwell. Your clients attempted to commit financial fraud against me. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime. Mrs. Windridge, from what I understand, your son was simply trying to help manage your finances during a difficult time. Sometimes family members can misinterpret helpful intentions. Then let me make my intentions perfectly clear. You're all trespassing on my property. You have 60 seconds to get back in your cars and leave, or I'm calling the sheriff. Jasmine pushed past Thomas, her face twisted with rage. You can't keep us away from what's rightfully ours. Thomas has legal rights here. What rights would those be? Blackwell opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder.
Mrs. Windridge, we have documentation showing a pattern of erratic behavior, social isolation, and poor judgment that suggests you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. Your son is prepared to petition the court for emergency guardianship to protect you from further harm. What kind of documentation? He began reading from a prepared list. Sudden changes in financial behavior, including freezing family members out of accounts without explanation. Paranoid accusations against family members who were trying to help. Refusal to accept assistance with property management despite clear need. Social withdrawal and rejection of family support. Each item on his list was technically true, but stripped of all context. Yes, I'd frozen the accounts to prevent theft. Yes, I'd made accusations because they were trying to rob me. Yes, I'd refused assistance because their help came with the price of my independence. Patricia stepped forward, her own briefcase in hand. Mr. Blackwell, I'm Patricia Wells, Mrs. Windridge's attorney. Before you continue making accusations, perhaps you'd like to see the evidence we've gathered about your client's activities. She pulled out the bank records showing the attempted fraudulent transfers, the forged power of attorney documents, and the research into assisted living facilities.
Your clients didn't just try to access Mrs. Winridge's accounts, they attempted to steal $45,000 using forged documents. They researched how to have her declared incompetent. They tricked her into signing power of attorney papers by disguising them as insurance forms. This isn't a case of misunderstood family help. This is elder financial abuse. Blackwell's confident expression flickered slightly as he reviewed Patricia's documents. Thomas and Jasmine exchanged worried glances. "These are taken out of context," Blackwell said finally. "My clients were preparing for contingencies, making sure they could help Mrs. Winridge if she became unable to care for herself. By stealing her money while she was still perfectly capable? That was a misunderstanding. They thought they had authorization." I'd heard enough. "Thomas, look me in the eye and tell me you didn't know exactly what you were doing when you tried to access my accounts." My son couldn't meet my gaze. He looked down at his feet like a child caught in a lie. "We were trying to protect you." "From what? From making mistakes? From being taken advantage of? From keeping control of my own life and money?" Jasmine stepped forward, her voice sharp with desperation. "You're 70 years old. You can't manage a ranch this size alone. You're going to end up broke and homeless because you're too stubborn to accept help." "Help? Is that what you call researching assisted living facilities behind my back, planning to sell my ranch, forging documents to steal my savings?" "We weren't stealing anything. We were protecting family assets." "Whose family? Because you sure as hell aren't acting like my family." Ruth appeared in the doorway behind me, her presence solid and reassuring. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Did this young woman just say Vivian can't manage the ranch alone?" Jasmine looked confused by the interruption. "Who are you?" "Ruth Carpenter. I've been ranching next door for 30 years, and I can tell you that Vivian Winridge has forgotten more about running a ranch than you'll ever know. She's been managing this place better than most men half her age." "That's not the point," Blackwell began. "No, that's exactly the point," Ruth continued. "You're trying to convince people that a woman who's successfully operated a 400-acre ranch for decades is suddenly incompetent. The only incompetent people I see here are the ones who think they can steal someone's life's work and call it helping." The second lawyer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. He was younger than Blackwell, with nervous energy and sweat stains on his shirt despite the cool afternoon. "Mrs. Winridge, we also have witnesses willing to testify about concerning changes in your behavior." "What witnesses?" He consulted his notes. "People in town who've noticed you becoming more isolated, more suspicious, less social than you used to be." I almost laughed. You mean the people you called last week fishing for dirt on me? The same people who called me afterward to warn me about your little investigation? His face went pale. Patricia smiled grimly and pulled out another folder. Since you brought up witnesses, we have statements from Dr. Harrison Mills attesting to Mrs. Winridge's excellent mental health, Pastor Williams confirming her active participation in community activities, and signed affidavits from 6 business owners in town who interacted with her this week and found her completely lucid and capable. We also have, Ruth added with obvious satisfaction, security camera footage of your clients attempting to break into the ranch office building last Tuesday night. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas and Jasmine both turned to stare at Blackwell, who was clearly learning about the break-in attempt for the first time. "Is this true?" he demanded. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear into the porch boards. "We just needed to get some documents. Family papers. You broke into my property to steal documents? They weren't stealing anything. They were retrieving family records that belonged to Thomas anyway. Nothing in that office belongs to Thomas. Everything on this ranch is mine, and you know it." Patricia pulled out her phone and showed the screen to Blackwell. The footage clearly shows 2 individuals using lockpicks to gain entry to a building on Mrs. Winridge's property. That's breaking and entering, counselor. Another felony to add to the fraud charges. Blackwell closed his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. "I need to consult with my clients privately." "You can consult all you want, but you'll do it somewhere else. You have 30 seconds to get off my property before I call Sheriff Martinez." "You can't just..." "Yes, I can. This is my land, my house, my life, and you're all trespassing." The third man, who'd remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. He was older than the others, with gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too many ugly family disputes. "Mrs. Winridge, I'm Dr. Philip Stern, a psychiatrist. Your son asked me to evaluate your mental state without my consent. I was hoping to have a brief conversation to assess..." "Get off my property. Mrs. Winridge, if you're truly competent, surely you wouldn't object to a simple evaluation." "I object to vultures circling while I'm still alive. I object to strangers trying to declare me crazy so my son can steal my ranch. And I object to having my mental health questioned by people who think attempted theft is normal family behavior." Patricia stepped closer to Dr. Stern. "Doctor, are you aware that attempting to conduct a psychiatric evaluation without patient consent, especially in service of a financial fraud scheme, could cost you your license?"
Dr. Stern's confidence evaporated instantly. "I was told this was a legitimate family concern. You were told wrong. These people are criminals, and you're being used as a tool in their scheme." Thomas finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate whine. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We can work something out. Just don't destroy our family over money." "I'm not destroying our family, Thomas. You already did that when you decided my life was worth less than your comfort." "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen? Explain to me how trying to steal my money and sell my ranch was supposed to help me." He couldn't answer. For the first time since this all began, Thomas was completely speechless. Jasmine, however, wasn't finished fighting. "Fine, you want to cut us off? Go ahead, but don't come crying to us when you're lying in a hospital bed with no one to take care of you. Don't call us when this ranch becomes too much and you lose everything." "I won't call you," I said calmly. "I'll call the sheriff when you try to come back and claim inheritance rights after I'm gone." "What's that supposed to mean?" Patricia answered for me. "It means Mrs. Winridge has updated her will. Your husband is no longer a beneficiary. Everything goes to the Montana Land Conservation Trust." The color drained from Jasmine's face. "You can't do that." "I can, and I did. The papers were filed yesterday." Thomas staggered backward, as if he'd been physically struck. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You wanted to treat me like an obstacle to your inheritance?
Congratulations. Now there is no inheritance. Blackwell grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him toward the cars. Relieving, this conversation is over. But Jasmine wasn't done fighting. She turned back toward me, her face twisted with pure hatred. You'll regret this, you bitter old witch. You'll die alone in this house and no one will care. No one will even find your body until the smell brings the neighbors. Ruth stepped forward, her hands balled into fists. That's enough. Get off this property right now or I'll throw you off myself. The 3 cars pulled away in a cloud of dust and gravel, leaving behind only silence and the settling dust of their defeat. I stood on the porch watching them disappear, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete victory. For the first time since Thomas left, I was truly free. 6 months later, I stood in the newly expanded guest lodge, watching Ruth hang the last of the handmade quilts that would welcome our first group of visitors. The Windridge Ranch Retreat for Women was set to open its doors in 2 weeks, and every detail reflected the transformation that had taken place not just in the buildings, but in my life. The ranch looked nothing like it had during Thomas and Jasmine's last visit. Where there had once been neglected outbuildings, we now had a renovated bunkhouse that could accommodate 12 women seeking refuge from abusive situations. The old equipment barn had been converted into a workshop space where guests could learn practical skills, everything from basic carpentry to financial planning. Even the main house glowed with fresh paint and new energy. "Hard to believe it's the same place," Ruth said calmly, stepping back to admire the quilt display. At 72, she moved with the confidence of someone who'd found her true calling. Remember when you thought you'd have to sell everything just to survive? I remember. Those first weeks after the confrontation had been challenging in ways I hadn't expected. The relief of victory had given way to the practical reality of running a large ranch operation with limited help. But necessity had forced innovation, and innovation had led to opportunities I'd never imagined. The transformation had started with Ruth's suggestion that we formalize our partnership. We'd combined our operations, sold her smaller property to fund improvements on mine, and created something neither of us could have built alone. The Montana Women's Ranch Cooperative was now a model that other agricultural communities were studying and replicating. Our guest ranch program brought in steady income from visitors who wanted to experience authentic ranch life. But the real purpose of the retreat went deeper than tourism. We provided a safe haven for women escaping abusive relationships, offering them time to heal while learning skills that would help them build independent lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas and Jasmine had tried to have me committed to a facility where I'd have no control over my own life. Instead, I'd created a facility where women could reclaim control of theirs. "Vivian, you've got a visitor," called Ashley Rodriguez, our program coordinator. She was a 30-year-old former social worker who'd burned out on the bureaucracy of the state system and jumped at the chance to run our programs. Says his name is Thomas Windridge. The past 6 months had been blissfully free from contact from my son. After their humiliating defeat on my porch, Thomas and Jasmine had disappeared back to Denver. I'd heard through town gossip that Thomas's construction business had failed, that they'd burned through their savings trying to maintain their lifestyle, and that Jasmine had filed for divorce 3 months ago. But I didn't expect him to show up here. I found him standing by the main gate, looking smaller than I remember. His clothes were clean but worn, and he'd lost the soft appearance that came from easy living. Most notably, he was alone. No Jasmine, no lawyers, no threats. "Hello, Mom." "Thomas."
We stood there for a moment, 2 people who shared DNA but felt like strangers. The ranch bustled with activity around us, Ruth directing the installation of new fence posts, Ashley reviewing applications from potential residents, contractors putting finishing touches on the workshop building. "The place looks incredible," he said finally. "I heard about what you're doing here. The women's program, the cooperative. It's impressive." "Thank you. I also heard that you're fully booked for the next 6 months. People are driving from 3 states away to participate in your programs." I waited. Thomas had always been someone who built up to his real point through small talk. "Mom, I came to apologize." For which part? All of it. The money, the legal threats, the way we tried to manipulate you, everything. He looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. I know saying sorry doesn't fix what we did, but I needed you to know that I understand how wrong we were. What changed your mind? Losing everything? He gave a bitter laugh. Jasmine left me the day our last credit card was declined, took everything she could carry and moved in with some other guy she'd been seeing on the side. Turned out she'd been planning her exit strategy for months, just like she'd planned the strategy to take your ranch. I'm sorry to hear about your divorce. Are you? The question hung between us. Was I sorry, or was I relieved that he'd finally seen Jasmine's true nature? I'm sorry you're hurting, I said finally. I'm not sorry that you learned who she really was. Thomas nodded slowly. I deserved that. And you deserved better than what we put you through. He looked around the ranch again. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you happy? The question surprised me with its directness. Was I happy? I thought about my daily routine. Up before dawn to check on the animals, breakfast with Ruth and Ashley while we planned the day's activities, hours spent working with women who arrived broken and gradually rebuilt their strength, evenings on the porch watching the sunset over land that remained safely in my control. Yes, I'm happier than I've been in years. Good. You deserve that. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly nervous about whatever came next. Mom, I'm not here to ask for money or to try to get back into the will. I know I forfeited any right to those things, but I was wondering if maybe, someday, I could earn the right to be part of your life again. What would that look like? I don't know. Maybe I could work here. I'm good with construction and maintenance. I could help with the building projects, the repairs, whatever you need. I wouldn't expect special treatment because I'm your son. I'd work for whatever wage you think I'm worth. The offer caught me off guard. This wasn't the entitled man who'd tried to steal my ranch 6 months ago. This was someone who seemed genuinely understand the magnitude of his mistakes. Thomas, why should I trust you? You shouldn't, not yet. Trust has to be earned, and I haven't earned it. But maybe I could start trying. Ruth appeared at my elbow, carrying a toolbox and wearing her most skeptical expression. She'd been listening from a distance, ready to intervene if this conversation went badly. Vivian, you need help with the workshop electrical work, she said pointedly. We can finish this conversation later. It was her polite way of giving me an excuse to end the encounter if I wanted to. Thomas, I need to think about this. If you're serious about wanting to make amends, prove it. Get your life stable, demonstrate that you can hold a job and pay your bills without trying to take shortcuts. Show me that you've learned something from losing everything. How long should I? However long it takes. There's no timeline for earning back trust. He nodded, accepting the conditions without argument. Can I ask one more thing? What? Could you tell me about Dad's workshop? I saw you converted the barn, but I remember he always wanted to build a proper woodworking shop. For the first time in our conversation, I felt a flicker of the connection we'd once shared. Thomas had spent countless hours in that barn as a boy, watching Robert work on projects and learning to use tools. We built it last month. It's part of our skills training program. Women learn carpentry, furniture repair, basic construction. Robert would have loved seeing his dream finally realized. Could I see it sometime? Maybe, when you've earned that privilege. Thomas left without pushing for more, which was itself a sign of growth. The man who'd tried to steal my ranch 6 months ago would have pressed for immediate reconciliation, would have expected forgiveness simply because he'd asked for it. That evening, Ruth and I sat on the porch, discussing the encounter over our usual herbal tea. What do you think? I asked. I think he looked like a man who's been humbled by life. Whether that's permanent or temporary remains to be seen. Part of me wants to give him a chance. And part of you is smart enough to be cautious. Both parts are right. Over the following months, Thomas proved his sincerity through actions rather than words. He found work with a construction company in Billings, rented a modest apartment, and slowly rebuilt his life. He sent me letters every few weeks, not asking for anything, just updating me on his progress and expressing gratitude for the lessons he'd learned through losing everything.
8 months after his first return visit, I invited him to attend the ranch's annual fundraising dinner. He came dressed in his best clothes, which weren't impressive, but were clean and respectful. He sat in the back, listened to speakers talk about the women we'd helped rebuild their lives, and contributed $20 to the silent auction, probably all he could afford. After the dinner, he approached me quietly. "Mom, I want you to know something. Watching what you've built here, seeing how you've helped these women find their strength, it makes me proud to be your son, even if I don't deserve that pride yet. Thomas, you'll always be my son. That never changed. What changed was whether you were someone I could trust and respect. Am I earning that back?" I looked at him carefully. The entitled attitude was gone. The expectation of special treatment had disappeared. In its place was someone who seemed genuinely committed to proving himself through sustained effort rather than promises. "You're making progress." That's all I can ask for. A year after the confrontation that changed everything, Thomas joined our seasonal work crew. He repaired fences, maintained equipment, and helped with construction projects. He worked harder than anyone, never complained about assignments, and treated the women in our programs with respect and kindness. Most importantly, he never once mentioned inheritance, money, or future ownership of the ranch. He seemed to understand that his relationship with me had to be rebuilt on entirely new terms, not as someone entitled to my assets, but as someone grateful to be included in my life. The ranch continued to thrive. We'd expanded our programs to include job training, counseling services, and even a small organic farming operation. Women came to us broken and left with skills, confidence, and hope for independent futures. Ruth and I had created something that would outlast both of us. The Montana Land Conservation Trust would ensure that the property remained dedicated to helping women long after we were gone. It was a legacy worth protecting, a purpose that gave meaning to all the struggles we'd endured. On quiet evenings, I still thought about the woman I'd been before Thomas tried to steal my ranch. That woman had been competent but cautious, strong but deferential, successful but somehow diminished by always putting others' needs before her own. The woman I had become was different. She set boundaries and enforced them. She built alliances with people who shared her values. She created something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. She understood that sometimes the greatest kindness is refusing to enable someone's worst impulses. Thomas was slowly earning his way back into my life, but it would be on my terms, at my pace, based on his demonstrated character rather than his promises or our shared DNA. As I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Clearwater Valley in shades of gold and crimson, I felt something I'd never expected to experience at 70 years old, the satisfaction of a life fully lived on my own terms. The ranch that Thomas had tried to steal had become something far more valuable than property. It had become proof that it's never too late to reclaim your power, rebuild your life, and create a legacy worthy of the strength it took to survive.